Thanks, folks. Thanks for joining. Thanks for giving us your time on a Saturday. Today's session is going to be about building an MCP server. In this session, we're going to learn a little bit more about what MCP servers are, how they actually operate, how do they actually provide value to your AI workflows. As always, the sessions are going to be very first principles based. So we're going to understand from grounds up what an MCP server is, how it actually operates in at a high level abstraction level. But then I'll also show you some pieces of code which I'll also share after the session of like how you can build your own MCP server and when do you actually sort of need it. uh, Now, before we start the session, two housekeeping items that I have to remind people. Number one, last time I think there were some mic issues that people were having. We seem to have fixed them from our end. Let us know, and let my co-host know, Avneet, she's here, if there is any issues that you are facing. The second thing is the experience of this meeting is not that great on the Zoom web portal. It's not something that we can change. It's how the Zoom web portal is set up. So if you are on that and if you run into issues, you might have to then use the desktop app. Okay, awesome. Now that's out of the way. So let's talk about what, like, a quick introduction of what these sessions are. So this is a weekly session that is being done by my co-host Avneet and my organization known as Curious Skill. This is a weekly AI Saturday session where we look at one topic in depth. We do like to have these sessions in a very interactive format. So there will be moments for folks to sort of ask questions. Oftentimes, we all learn from each other from the questions itself. So don't be shy. Please ask things that are unclear. This we are trying to build sort of a community of learning, community of practice that all learns AI together. If you are curious about it, you can go to our meetup group and go to past events, and you can see all the events that we have done. The recordings of and the slides of previous events are also there on our meetup group for public if anybody wants to see. Okay, awesome. Now, before we actually go into like the work mode of this, I do want to say that it's important for all of us to sort of create a safe space within this group. So it's important for us to sort of just making sure that like we are being respectful. I understand that we all have a lot of things going on in our lives, but it's important for us this to be a healthy, nice space for us to learn from each other and to actually like work with each other, and to just like create that sort of a holistic space. If somebody is not doing that, we are going to be removing them because it's our responsibility to sort of curate this experience. Uh, and I think I did get an early question at some point about like recording. Yes, there will be a recording. We'll be uploading it on YouTube, and that will be available to the group. Okay, amazing. Now, before we start, it will be good to quickly introduce yourself. So I'll just quickly talk about myself. My name is Madhav. I am one of the co-founders. My co-host Avdeet is also here. We run Curious Skill, which is a skill training organization, and this is our community building aspect of that. Now, what I'm going to ask folks is if they feel comfortable, maybe introduce yourself on Zoom chat quickly. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what do you do, and what are some tools that you would like your AI to connect with, or in general, what would you like to learn today? So I'm going to give it a minute for people to quickly write that. If you are shy, don't no pressure, but if you can, we would love to know a little bit about you. So I'm going to give, hey Romel, hey everyone, you Salesforce architect, nice. It's been a while since I've used Salesforce. I'm going to give it maybe one more minute, folks. And folks, if you are shy, you don't need to, but we would love to get to know. Hey Shashwat, hey Salim, nice. Hey James, hey Ashish, hey Rashpal, nice. We are starting to see a very interesting mixed group. AI/ML engineer, nice. That's cool. I'll just give it 10 more seconds, folks, and then we'll sort of dive into it. Oh, nice. We have a software development manager from OpenClaw. That's cool. Ariman. Okay, I won't be able to, I think, go through everybody's names, I think, because it's streaming pretty fast. But welcome, everyone. Thanks for putting your stuff in. Now, what the way the session is going to be, I'm going to be talking about different concepts in the session. You can keep introducing yourself, but also during the session, if you have questions, feel free to ask. I can help answer that. And then there also be breaks for people to understand. The way the session is going to be structured is we are going to look at the entire session into different pieces. The first thing that we're going to do is sort of look at the background of why MCP was created. Then we are going to sort of look at the architecture of it. We are going to look at what are the basics of it, and then I'm going to do like a live demo of how would you sort of build it in Python, how would you configure it in your system, how would it actually talk to your system. So we're going to see all of that together. So I'm going to get into it, but folks, if you have any questions during the session, you can ask on Zoom chat. Okay, amazing. Okay. Let's start here. Let's try and understand why did the concept of an MCP exist. And to sort of do that, it's important to first know what an MCP is. So I'm just going to Google. And folks, my sessions, our sessions oftentimes tend to be very open-ended, different sort of tools that we use. So we are going to be using browser, we are going to use Excalidraw and slides. So it'll be multiple things. Okay. So what MCP essentially is a protocol. Now, it's known as the Model Context Protocol. I'm going to copy this and put this on Zoom chat. Uh, but essentially, what this protocol does is the purpose of this protocol is, let's say you are using an AI tool. Um, or rather, I would rather be more specific. You are using an LLM tool or interface. Let's say you are using Cloud Cowork. We'll start from there. So now the concept of this tool was, let's say you are using this tool, and one of the items of this tool in the background is, let me just increase the size. Sorry, folks. Okay. Okay. So let's say you're using Cloud Cowork. Now, the concept is like obviously these tools use an AI model in the background for answering questions. But let's say what you want to do is you want to use Cloud Cowork to talk to an external system. Now, what could those external system be? That external system could be, if people have used this, a Jira instance. Let's say you want to use your Cloud Cowork so that it is able to fetch all the different Jira tickets that you have. And I'm using Cloud Cowork, folks, as a proxy. This could be any tool. This could be, you might be using Cursor, you might be using ChatGPT's interface, you might be using Codex. There can be any number of different tools that you are using. Now, let's say you are using this tool and you want to access some information from Jira. Let's say another tool, you want to access some code from GitHub. Let's say you want your tool, your AI agent to be able to do that. Now, what model context protocol does, and in the most dumbest, simplest way of explaining this would be, it sort of sits in between. So I'm going to create it here. I'm going to call it MCP, Model Context Protocol, but I'll sort of explain this in a second about why am I placing it here. What an MCP essentially ends up doing is, let's say you go to your Claude and you type, tell me the Jira tickets that were created last week by XY person. Now, what ends up happening is your AI system, your LLM system is going to talk to the MCP server, and then the MCP is then going to be able to communicate to the Jira backend, get information from that. So it's going to be able to get that information, and then it's going to feed that information back into your Cloud Cowork instance. And that is the key part of what an MCP does. Oh, whoops, so sorry, folks. Yes, that's the key part that an MCP does. It sort of facilitates a conversation between your AI instance and let's say an AI, let's say an external system that you want your system to talk to, and then that MCP can then sort of orchestrate that. A similar thing would happen if, let's say, you wanted your AI system to talk to or your AI agent to talk to GitHub. You might, so let's call it the Jira MCP, which by the way, folks, is a real thing. Let's say I call it the GitHub MCP. And now what GitHub MCP is going to do the same thing. Your Cloud Cowork is going to talk to GitHub MCP. The GitHub MCP is going to eventually communicate it here. You get some responses back, and then it is going to give the response back here. So now, if you hear the term that a lot of organizations right now are creating their own MCPs, the big reason for that is it allows an AI agent to talk to an organization's backend without having to actually log into the UI of that organization. So I can totally imagine a world where I never need to actually go into the Jira UI. But what I can essentially do is I can go to my Cloud Cowork, I can connect it to that Jira, and then it's able to fetch all of that information and give it to me in that instance. If people want to get a feel of what that looks like, I'll just show you a very quick demo, and then we'll go back into the actual details. Let's say this is my own Cloud Cowork. Now, what I have done is, and this will make sense by the end of the session, but this is just an early preview. I have created a weather MCP server, which basically means that I have hooked up my Claude with the US's weather API. And so if I go back here, and now I can go in here and say, tell me the weather in California. And now what you're going to see is it is then going to try and figure out what tools I have. And we'll talk about why it sort of works in this manner. And then these are the tools that I have sort of created, which is getting the forecast and getting the weather, if you can see it here. So I've created these tools. And what this would essentially do is it is going to communicate to the weather authority via an MCP server. Now, I'm going to go back to my Excalibur. I think somebody has a question about meeting passcode. I think, Avneet, you can maybe just quickly coordinate with Kevin. Uh, Thanks, folks. Okay, awesome.
Sorry, Madhav, I just wanted to update. So, Madhav mentioned in the beginning that if you are joining via the browser, you will not be able to have certain features. And Kevin, I'm not able to write back to you because you have joined via browser.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah,
I apologize for that, but yeah.
yeah. Thanks, Avneet, for clarifying that. And folks, this isn't something that we have configured. It's just the way the Zoom web system is. There are certain limitations that it has. We tried our best to debug this. And yes, as Vincent said, we are going to be sharing a recording. Thanks, Avneet, for updating this. Okay, so back here. So I created a weather MCP. That MCP talks to the weather US's weather authority, gets that data, and then fetches it for me inside my Claude's AI agent. Now, I got a couple of amazing questions, which was also what I wanted to cover. One of the first question was, what's the difference between using an API? Amazing question. Now, let's look at the world when we didn't have an MCP concept. Let's go back here. Let's say I have a Claude code, okay? Or maybe just a Claude Cowork rather than a Claude code. And now let's go back here. And let's say this system wanted to talk to let's say the Jira system, right? Now, for people who are in the programming world, they understand that the systems that we can talk to external system via APIs, which is basically a shorthand of application programming interfaces, which is a way for a system to call a URL and get data and send data in the most dumbest of format. Now, in the past, if you wanted your Cloud Cowork to talk to Jira API, right? Now, Cloud Cowork doesn't have inherent code in it. It doesn't know how the Jira API actually works, right? It doesn't actually know that what are the endpoints, how it is actually set up. So what you would have to do in the past was you would have to maybe write a Python code to access Jira API. So you might have to do that. You might have to first of all write a bunch of Python code to access the Jira API. All of this logic would then have to be written by you. Then you would have to make Claude run this piece of code. Then this code would access the API endpoint, fetch that data, and then give it back to Claude Cowork. So this is where it sort of would have become a little this is where this would have become a little bit difficult because you would then have to write your own code to actually like make the communication happen. But when you go into this world, when you have these MCP servers that are available, these MCP servers then take away all your need of doing all of this. They are provided by the organizations themselves. Obviously, you might have to pay based on your subscription, and then they can take care of all this orchestration between the agent and the API system. You don't have to build your own script for actually doing that communication. Let me know. Uh, A Kadakia, if I answered your question, but hopefully this would have answered it. A Lewis has a point. There are people having trouble getting in. I'm assuming the issue is happening with the Zoom website of things. We have tried to sort of solve that, but it has been a little difficult because Zoom Web has certain restrictions. So if it is related to Zoom Web, it might be tricky. But maybe if it is something else, you guys can let us know. Thank you so much. Okay, I got another question. Where will the recording be shared? Not on the website. It's on our Meetup channel. So if you go to our Meetup channel, if you scroll below, you will find a lot of discussions here. So this is where I usually post everything, the recording, the slides, all the resources are freely available. So we are going to put all of that there. Okay, awesome. So again, going back to the background, I'm hoping that the concept is starting to make sense to people. We need this MCP server as a middle place to communicate with external systems. And then you can install those MCP inside your agent so that it's able to do that communication. Now, let's go back to the slides. Let's see if I missed something. Yes, again, this was again the problem that it sort of had before. Like I said, you had to like sort of make them talk to each other. You had to write your own different skills. Now, using an MCP is like the same sort of a server that every Cloud agent can hook into. And then if they are able to speak MCP to each other, it sort of becomes a common pattern for systems to talk to each other. Now, I got a very great question, and that's very timely because we are in the same moment. Do MCP servers adhere to a common spec? Yes. MCP servers. So this was an open standard that was published by Anthropic in 2024. They do adhere to a common spec. So if you want to see the spec, if you go here, you will be able to see the entire specification. Just like you have HTTP spec and all of those specs, the MCP spec is available freely online. It is the spec that most companies are now starting to follow. And then it sort of allows you to sort of create these sort of servers. I will be going into the details of this spec as well, Roman, but let me know if that answered your question. Is it one MCP server per API or one MCP server can have many APIs? So Isha, great question. One MCP server can have all your APIs in it. Typically, the way people do it is, let's say I create an MCP for Jira. So then for Jira, let's say there are 100 different APIs. I would typically try to package them into my one single MCP server and then expose them as tools for your agent. I'll show what that means, but let's say if I go online and if I say Atlassian MCP, so you will find this link and then it will have like a lot of details about like how to sort of like connect to their one MCP server that does everything for you. So it will be one MCP server typically. There might be organizations that might be doing some other kind of bucketing, but typically you want your one standard interface for your cloud, for your agent. So MCPs are basically APIs for LLMs. Also, Isha, let me know if I answered your question. Arpan. So MCPs are APIs for LLMs. I would call them as tools for LLMs because MCP doesn't have to call a background API. It could be that you wrote an MCP server that writes jokes for your Claude, for your AI agent. So it wouldn't even call an external thing. It might just be having an internal thing. So they're sort of like tools for an AI agent, but I'll explain that in a second of how that is. To call APIs without us manually configuring. Okay, I'm getting a few questions. Would it not be like MCP is to call APIs without us manually configuring? So Sashwat, we do need some configuration. You do need a configuration to make your AI agent talk to the MCP server. So if I go back here, you see like my AI agent, Claude Cowork, is talking to Jira and GitHub MCP. So you do need to configure that. I'm going to show you guys how that configuration happens. But once that configuration is done, yes, then you don't need to do any of this. Then all of that is comes settled in itself. Let me know if I answered. Yes, the recording will be sent Anna on the meetup group. API for I Sylvia, if you could elaborate on your question. Thank you. I got another one. How would a skill differ from an MCP if it is not calling external APIs? Great question, Ariman. So the if you look at the word, right, a skill is a workflow. A skill is telling your AI agent you should take this series of steps to do something. The purpose of an MCP is to add additional context to your agent. And that context can come from anybody. That context can come from the MCP server talking to Jira. That context can come from you having some knowledge that you have fed into your MCP. Now, the difference is if you do create, let's say, Ariman, you are very good at creating recipes for food. Let's say you created an MCP server that has all those recipes put in. You just have to expose it once, and anybody who needs an AI agent with the latest recipes for something, they can all talk to it. So a skills purpose is very workflow oriented. Take these series of steps to do something, whereas a context, the purpose of MCP is to add relevant information to your AI agent session. Let me know if I answered that. How do they actually decide which tool to call from MCU server? Is that reasoning happening on the models or is there logic we can control? Great question, Ty. So it's both. There is some control we have. I'll show you guys how. But there is a sort of a description we can write in MCP that when you should be calling this tool. But the reasoning itself is done at the model level to decide when to call which tool. Having said that, there is some control that we do have that we can configure. Admin manager of MCP as compared to the Python code. Yeah, Shashwat, I agree. I think Kevin's question has been answered. And A. Lewis as well. Okay, amazing. Great questions, folks. This is amazing. This is super, super helpful. Let's go back here. Okay, so MCP, it's a protocol. Now, we are going to do, this is a little bit of a technical session, folks. So we are going to look at a little bit of an architecture of how the protocol works. You guys don't have, like, you can still keep asking me questions, but this is where we are going to actually look at the architecture of MCP. And again, yes, the recording will be shared on the meetup group itself. It's there on the public meetup group. I'll share a link to the group in a bit. Okay. Now, when you are sort of building sort of like an MCP application, now this is how to sort of look at the mental model of it. So there are three pieces. You can also call them two different pieces, but it's better to sort of look at three different pieces as an architecture. And yes, Arpan, we are going to be sharing the slides. Okay. Cool. So we have a host. The host is your AI application. Now, an AI application can be anything that I showed you guys like this, like Cloud Code. So this could be the AI application. It could be any application that you are sort of like using from your end for your agentic AI workflow. It could be any AI applications there. So your host can be that. Now, not all AI agent or AI applications support MCP right now. It's a new protocol. It's hard. It's in its second year. So now we are slowly starting to see a lot more of adoption. But in the applications that do sort of support that, like Cloud Desktop, Cloud Code, Cursor, they all have that. They all have an internal client, and that client is the thing that talks to the MCP server. So it is a three-part. You can look at it at two-part, but I find it better to look at it at three-part. That your host is your basic AI agent that you are talking to. Your chat session is going on. Your client is inbuilt into your AI agent, and its role is to actually just talk to the server and to the MCP server and get that data back. Now, I'm going to quickly detour to answer a question. Is an MCP server able to call local scales? So it's more reliable than having an agent MD5 that is scalar backed by some arbitrary code. Yes, to kind of both, Matthew. Again, the purpose of an MCP server is to add the relevant context. Your MCP server can have skills that I'll show you guys. There are three kinds of things it can have. It can have skills that it needs. So your MCP server can actually just pick up those skills and send it to your client and to run them. So you can have skills, you can have hard coded resources, and you can have tool calls, which is to the external system. And it is a little bit more reliable, mostly because it's one central place and it's oftentimes maintained by the organization that you are trying to connect to. So they do have done their due diligence of actually packaging the application logic and business logic into that. Okay, so we talked about three different things. Great question, A. Kadakia. How is client written? Can it be inserted to host? I don't know. That's a great question. Maybe there is a way for us to customize your own MCP client. I do think there is a specification of MCP client. So if you go here, you do see that the MCP protocol has a sense of specification here that you can see. So maybe there is a way to do that. I haven't tried doing it, but I'm sure like if a specification is there, you can create your own client as well. Great question. Okay. Now, when this happens, now this is the part where like it's important to sort of understand how MCP server is written up as an architecture. When you have a host, let's say in my case, the host that we are going to look at is Claude Code. This is the host that we are going to be primarily focusing on in today's session. Now, when you have a Claude Code host like that, for it to connect to an MCP server, there are two different mechanisms that one can follow. And it's important to sort of wrap our head around both. The more common mechanism these days is a remote server. What that means is, let's say I want my Cloud Cowork to connect to Jira. So Atlassian has created their own MCP server. It is set up on an HTTP link. And now you are able to you can make your own host connect to that HTTP server directly. So one mechanism is that when that's the most typical organization mechanism where people create an MCP server, like the organization that I work for, we have created our MCP server and then we have sort of given it to our clients to connect to. The second way of doing it is you can also create an MCP server locally in your system. The way it sort of works is you create a local server. It communicates as a separate process. Now, for people who have done operating system theory back in the day, remember we used to learn about inter-process communication. So it uses a process to process on the same system communication using standard input output to communicate with each other. So you can totally you do is you can download somebody's MCP server and run it on your system, and you can make your own AI agent talk to it. So that's if you want to do it on the same system. Whereas if you want to create something that everybody can access, then that can be an HTTP server. So there are two sort of ways how your Claude Cowork sort of or your AI agent is going to communicate to an MCP server. If it's on the same system, then you can like run a local server and connect to it via process to process communication. If it's on a remote server, then you have to like set it up as an HTTP thing. After the next slide, I'm going to pause for questions again. Now, or maybe the slide after. Now, this is for people who are into the network engineering side of things, in case people want to know this. Behind the scenes, if people remember the network stack that we used to learn, we used to have the data layer and the transport layer. So at the data layer, in terms of how the data is formatted between your AI agent and the MCP server, it uses JSON RPC 2.0, which is again a specification. I'll just open that. That is a communication between two different systems that one can use. It's a long specification to read. If somebody is into that side of things, I'm going to share it on Zoom chat. So this is the specification that it uses for the data for the formatting of the data between two systems and how they talk. So they are all JSON payloads. I'll show you guys how the payloads actually look like. So they are all JSON payloads, and they are all sort of constantly talking to each other. Now, at a level above that, the communication on the same system, like I said, happens via standard I/O interprocess, and over the network, it happens via HTTP. Now, I'm going to pause. How is there any security risk in downloading someone else's MCP server? How to overcome that? That's a great question, Isha. I would say there are a few ways that you can do. And these are just like top of my head. The first way is if you are going to GitHub and you are downloading somebody's MCP server, it's always a good idea to just look at the how many people are using it, what are the issues that have been opened. These days, there's a lot of automatic scanning on repositories of GitHub of anything of big security risks. So it would be good to go through that. What I do these days for any package that I download from the internet, I have Cloud Code installed on my system. I use it to sort of do a security review of that code base, just to get like a sense of like what are the potential issues that can happen. So there are multiple such ways that you can sort of go about it. It will require a little bit of a due diligence. But that's but I would also argue that the risk is, I guess, very similar to the kind of risk that you get when you are using any open source package. To actually just look at, does it have any vulnerabilities? Does it have any actions that I don't want it to do? As we go on in the slides, I'm also going to explain how to understand the different pieces of an MCP server. So maybe that will also give you a sense of like how to sort of analyze what they do. Let me know if I answered your question. Okay, thanks, Isha. Okay. Uh, Now, again, this is sort of a repeat. It has two different things. You have the standard IO, which is like it sort of runs. It is sort of like it sort of runs locally. It sort of allows inter-process communication, and then you have an HTTP server, which you can put it on a host, and then people and things can connect via HTTP. If you're creating your own MCP, it is MCP only supports HTTP. No, like I said, it has two different protocols. It uses a local inter-process standard input-output protocol, and then if you want to put it on a server, it also supports HTTP protocol. Locally, you can also use HTTP if you want. Either of those work, but those are the two options that it has currently. It's the scaling and stupidity agent can introduce on the fly compared to any open source package. Oh, for sure. I agree. I think like with AI agents, they can do more dumb stuff. But I feel that's a general hygiene that one has to do with these AI agents when they are writing code. Yeah, that's a great point. When you run it, runs your own system versus HTTP. So for the based on where you run it, runs over your own system versus HTTP with security. So OAuth, sorry, not OAuth. MCP has different specifications for security as well. It does recommend if you are building a full scale HTTP system to use OAuth for it. It has a protocol guide of how you can use one authentication for creating an OAuth token. That token is then sent as a part of your HTTP communication. So there is that standard that is available. Locally, if you are doing standard IO, I haven't looked into like how you can add a security token there. But locally, if you are using HTTP or even if you are using an external HTTP, typically they use like an OAuth authentication mechanism and authorization mechanism to get like a token, and then that token is used for the communication with the MCP. It is something that's an evolving spec. I think they will add more recommendations on how you can do that sort of better. Obviously, there is a dumb way of storing the token inside your host, but that's not something that they recommend you do. They do mention OAuth as the primary mechanism. Thanks for the question, Sashwat. And folks who don't know what OAuth is a way for applications. So if you think about what all we have talked about, right? These are like this is A application talking to B application, which is talking to C application. So OAuth is a mechanism to sort of make applications do login into each other, authenticate into each other. It's a whole other spec and maybe a whole other session to learn about it. Not related to AI. It's older than that, but it's what like current MCP protocol also sort of recommends. Okay, amazing. Now, this is how sort of a communication message between the host, which is your Claude, and let's say in my case, which is Claude, it might be something else, and between an MCP server looks like. So all the communication is happening as these JSON blobs. Again, you can look into like the specification of JSON RPC, but basically it has three kinds of JSON messages. There is a request, which is like, oh, I want you to do ABC. There is a response, which is like the response that you get from the server. And then there is a notification, which is more so like, oh, there is an update. Notification is the one that can like go from the server to the client. So an MCP server can update an AI agent system that, oh, there is a new thing that is added to me, or ABC is happening. So it's sort of asynchronous. It's sort of fire and forget sort of a message, if people remember that from the old Java terminology. But basically, like so the notification is more so used for asynchronous communication, but most of the communication is request and response. Again, I'm not going to go too deep into the JSON RPC, but you can like read the specification. You can see like how the communication is happening there. Now, this is how a connection happens between an AI agent and the MCP server. So the way it sort of works is there's an initialization, and I'll sort of show you how this looks like. The AI agent gets a response from the server, then the connection is established, then there is a period of discovery. Now, discovery is where I think somebody has asked, how does the AI agent know what tools to call? That's where the discovery happens. where the agent like Cloud Cowork is going to ask the MCP server, what are your capabilities that you are providing me? We'll talk about what all an MCP server can contain very soon. But basically, this discovery is super important. And this is where a lot of times, if you are building an MCP server, problems happen. Because if your discovery isn't clean, then your AI host, your AI agent will never really know what all services does the MCP server provide. So discovery is very crucial. It is what tells an AI agent that, okay, these are the things that are now available to me. And that is where it can then use that to sort of decide what is the thing that it has to invoke. So discovery is very important. And then the final step is the invocation. So once the discovery has done, the AI agent and the MCP server are sort of like in a stale state. They're just there until I put in a command that, oh, tell me the weather in California. At that time, the AI agent using its model figures out, oh, I need to call this tool from the MCP server. Then it calls that tool, gets that response as a JSON, like I showed you, and then gives you back the data. So it all sort of happens behind the scenes. Now, these are very high level steps, how to write product requirements for an MCP server. I'll get to that in a second. These are your high level sort of handshake between the MCP server and the AI agent. Now, I am gonna answer a couple of questions. As a non-tech PM, how to write product requirements for an MCP server. So, James, the way I would look at it is, if you are a non-tech PM, what would be good for you to think about is if somebody is using, let's say, your MCP server in a session like this, how would you like their experience to be? What all tools would you like them to be able to have? So, like typically when a PM, when you are building a website, you typically think of user experience, right? I click a button here, I download there. In the MCP world, you have to think about how the agent UI, this thing, how the experience you want here, what are the things you want the person to available to have, what are the kind of prompts that your customer might have. So that's the change. And once you have that, then that is but on top of what you would build an MCP server on. That's a short answer. That's a very quick answer, but I'm hoping that sort of gives you like a good context. Can one MCP server serve multiple different AI agents at the same time, or is it usually built with just one specific use case in mind? So one MCP server typically will have many AI agents at the same time. Think of it the same way as you are building an API, right? If you are Atlassian, you build a bunch of APIs. Some customers will use five of them, other customers will use the remaining 10. Same with an MCP server. An MCP server can connect to as many AI agents as the infrastructure allows, and then each individual AI agent might use different tools. So it's one MCP server that's connected to many AI agents. Thank you. Thanks, Alana. If an MCP server has multiple API integrated, then each API is mapped with its own tool, or one tool can have multiple APIs. That's an amazing question, Rashpal. I will try and show you a little bit about it, but there are two ways to look at it. If so, depends on how you define a tool. If you define a tool as a create, retrieve, update, delete as a CRUD tool, then yes, maybe your one tool will be connected to one API endpoint with maybe like all four different operations in one tool. So that's one way of sort of doing that. And that's sort of like one way that you can do that. Having said that, where is the question? Sorry. Yeah, having said that, oftentimes you want your tools to be business workflows. You don't like, okay, again, imagine the person on Jira is using the UI. When you are on the UI and when you create a new ticket, it calls seven different APIs in the background. So sometimes you want your tools to mimic like that. And in that case, you might have five different APIs being called within that same tool. So it really depends on how you want the experience of the MCP to be. That's where James's questions come into picture of like, do you want to expose tools which show business workflows, or do you want each tool to be like each different endpoint? It really depends who your clients are and how they are going to be using the MCP. Ariman, yes, I'm going to put the links to the resources for sure. Do MCP show it capabilities? Yes, Venkat. I can show you how that actually works in a second. That makes sense. How do you handle situations where the AI agent needs to call multiple tools in a sequence? How do you handle situations where the AI agents need to call multiple tools in SQL? Does MCP have any built-in way to chain calls? Is that all on the agent's reasoning? Again, you can create a tool which inside it has that reasoning, right? Inside your MCP server, you can write a tool. Let's say your tool is let's say your tool is create a ticket on Jira. I'm just using that as an example. And then inside that tool, all the different APIs that needs to be called, they're all sequenced in. There is one, that is one way. Another way is that let's say you want the tools to be called in a sequence at the AI agent level. That is also something that you can set up so that your AI agent can reason, okay, I'm going to call A tool and then I'm going to call B tool. They will typically do that by using a skill. So in a situation when you want your AI agent to call five different tools in the MCP in a sequence, then your MCP server should potentially also expose a workflow called a skill, which is what you would typically run, and that would enable that. I'm going to show that in a second, but let me know if I answered your question. It sounds like the MCP servers are built on the consumer side to be used by consumer apps. I would say yes and no both. I think yes, mostly the consumer, but it depends on how you define a consumer because your consumer might be a human sitting on a screen like this. Your consumer might be an AI agent that is part of a bigger set of AI agents that is consuming. So you can sort of have both. But yes, the concept of an MCP is to add that layer of users AI agentic AI experience, and how do you make that a little bit more smoother. Uh, Okay, amazing. These are awesome questions, folks. And folks, I'm trying my best to break down the answers. If there is a question that I have not answered properly, just let me know and I can quickly talk about it. Okay, let's go back into the slides. Dun, 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 dun. Where was I? Okay, now, now let's look at some of the primitives, folks, of what all an MCP server can expose. This will hopefully answer some of the questions that people are asking about, like what are the things that an MCP server can sort of give you. Now, there are three different things that an MCP server can sort of show. The first thing can be, just one second. Um, okay, I think somebody sort of asked for stopping the AI companion. Sort of, unfortunately, folks, we do need that for our own summary, so we will be continuing that. Okay, so let's talk about primitives. And when I mean primitives, I mean what are the different options that your MCP server can provide to your host, to your AI agent. Now, the first thing that it provides is a set of tools. Now, tools as actions that you want your AI agent to sort of do. So, a tool can be search records, send a message, run a query. Tools can also be like I was showing you when I was using the weather MCP that I have created. It sort of it calls a tool known as get weather, which is going to give you like the weather of a particular state in the US. So tools are actions, and tools is typically where you are calling the backend APIs. So let's say you have a tool get weather. This is where you are going to actually be calling the API endpoint that you are calling, and then you are going to expose that to the MCP server. So tools are the actions that a model can take. These are all invoked by the model. Now, resources. Now, this is an important new thing for people to sort of understand. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I haven't seen too much use cases for it, but it is useful. A resource is just a blurb of data that the MCP server can send back to your AI agent. So a resource can essentially be the contents of a file. It can be like let's say you have something hard coded that you want. I'll show you a quick example of a resource. So a resource can be sort of like that. It's sort of like a primitive that allows a more of like already preset information inside the MCP server to be sent back to the AI agent. So you have two, you have resources, and this is a specific type of a resource known as a prompt. And now this is super important. This is a question that I think Ty had asked earlier about how like in case I want to chain my tool calls. Oftentimes, when you're building an MCP server, rather than just sort of like just giving them the tools, you also want to give specialized skills or prompts that you want your user to run if they want a good experience. Think of them like in the world of UX development, right? Sometimes when you open a new website, they show you a set of series of steps that a person can take to do something. Let's say you want to do a Facebook post, it might show you like, oh, click here, do this, and then do this, and then share a Facebook post. This is sort of the same idea here, that you don't just want to give tools to your AI clients, you want to give them workflows so that they don't have to go through the nuances of understanding that, oh, A tool needs to call B tool after that, and after that, C tool needs to be called. And the agent can sort of do that on its own. So, prompt is a specialized resource that allows you to sort of incorporate a longer skill of an actual prompt that then can be used by the AI agent to actually get that information from the particular MCP server. Jaya has a question. When a user type a prompt, how does the host calls the tools exposed via MCP? Great question, Jay. Now, the way it happens is, I'll try to answer that by going back a little bit. Remember, I said that there is a discovery period when a host and an MCP server are talking to each other. At this discovery period, what ends up happening is what's the word? Your AI agent is almost making an index of, okay, these are the tools, these are the resources, these are the prompts that are available. And when it creates that index, let's say I ask my Claude agent to be like, oh, tell me the weather in Wisconsin right now. It is then going to go through its existing tools, read the what does the tool does, and then make a call that, oh, this is the tool that might be useful for it. So it is something that the host uses an AI model to make a decision on, but that decision oftentimes happens during the discovery phase when you actually when the AI host actually gets all that information of, okay, these are the things that this MCP server can do. Let me know if I answered your question, by the way. Okay, let's go back here. Now, I'm just going to see if there are more questions for me. Is this part of MCP development? Yes. When you are building your MCP, right, you will be setting up tools, you will be setting up resources and prompts. And once you have set those up, then after that, your AI agent will be able to discover them. Okay, Venkata has a question. Are MCP servers stateless? Can we front MCP server with policies? That's a great question, Venkata. Now, I am going to answer it in two different ways. You can build a stateless MCP server totally, but once you start having OAuth and once you start having authentication and authorization, so you are able to do what people, as we call them, RBAC or role-based access policies. So you can set up an authentication and authorization that only certain tools are available for access for a particular user and not everybody. So OAuth allows you to add that level of statefulness. And once you go down that route, then you can make it fully like a stateful system, just like you have a UX where you have logged in and you can do certain operations. And that's where you can also incorporate policies. So let's say like my day job, I work in a cybersecurity firm. We have an MCP server. So we have certain tools that have policies to them of how they can and cannot be used. All of them are sort of work after an OAuth token has been granted, and that token itself carries the information of like what are they allowed to do, what are they not allowed to do. So you can do totally all of that, but you do have to add a layer of authorization, authentication, and access and all of that to add that thing. Let me know, Venkata, if I answered your question. That's a design choice also. With an MCP server, will it consume less context calling skill? That's unknown, Matthew. It might or it might not. I will say though, if you are building an MCP server, you do want to test it against different models. Because sometimes what can happen is that I have seen this happen in our MCP server too. Our MCP server sort of works better with cursor and uses less tokens versus Claude. There is a little bit of an unknown there because each model works differently. But the best way to do that is to create your own authoritative sort of benchmarks internally to first see how many tokens are being used and then use skills wherever you can to reduce the token usage. So there are ways to solve that, but first you have to build it, evaluate it, and then sort of improve it. There is no one shot, this will reduce or the other thing will reduce. It really happens as you do it. For Jira MCP standard goes using Jira REST API, how can I orchestrate from local? Great question, Deepak. So I think it again depends on how what's happening in the model's mind. But if your Claude code for let's say is having some issues, you can create like a skill file for your Claude 4 to always remember to like use the Atlassian MCP. This has I have also run into this. Sometimes it just forgets that it has access to that MCP server. So all my workflows that I do with my prompting, I have like a predefined workflow that, oh, whenever I'm asking for any Jira information, use the MCP first and then use the other thing. So that's again a nuance that you will have to solve at the model level sometimes because that does happen. Do MCPs use tokens? Yes, James. Everything on an AI side uses tokens. So when you get the response from a tool, from a resource, from a prompt, all of that gets added to your context window and it uses the tokens. Every conversation in an AI agent is a token. Now, if you are asking if the MCP server itself uses tokens, no, the server itself is just an old school software dev server that is just giving you JSON information. But your AI agent will use tokens. Great questions, folks. I'm loving how people are sort of asking these. Okay, give me 1 second. I just need to drink some water. What is the best way to save tokens? I don't know. It is an open question. In my opinion, in my engineering expertise, the best way to save tokens is to test different workflows and see like which one is better, which one is worse, and then improve your MCP server. I don't know of a single one-shot answer. It really depends on what your MCP server is actually doing. So does MCP servers help with the token optimization or no impact? The purpose of MCP server is to get external application context into your client. They are not meant for token optimization. You might be able to add some token optimization because now rather than you writing a Python code to access an application, you can do it via this standard MCP interface. So you might get it by default because you are not having to do this. You have this standard interface, so that might lead your tokens to be better. But the purpose of an MCP is not token optimization. It's more so that it can facilitate this conversation between your AI agent and an external application. You know, it may help with token. Yeah, the instructions may help, but it really depends. Okay. Now, I do want to talk about a couple of quick things. These are like these are just an extra pieces of information. The key most important ones are the tools, the resources, and the prompts. Now, there are a couple of things that the server can ask the AI agent as well. So it can ask for some sample data. Like sometimes the server asks the host model. Sometimes it does it just to sort of get a sense of like how is the MCP performing. So sampling and elicitation, like basically the MCP server is asking questions to your AI model. So those are sometimes things that are needed for different very specific workflows. I'm not going to spend too much time into it because that's also something that can happen. The one thing that does happen quite a bit is that the server does a lot of logging. So it's important for the MCP server to record what worked, what didn't work. So it does a lot of logging. All that logging information comes to your AI client, and that is something that you have access to see like if the server is performing properly, if it is having any specific information. So there is a bunch of information that the server can directly talk to your host as well. And the protocol, it's not easy, like it's not something that the server can decide to do on its own. The host, you have to allow it to give you that information, and only then that happens. And obviously now we also have the authentication layer, as I said, which is like sort of the way for the two systems to talk to each other. So there are some, like I said, the host talks to the server, but the server can also sort of talk to the host. But again, it's all gated behind a bunch of permissions that you have to do. This is just like a standard. This is most recent stat, but I don't know like how recent it is, but I looked at it, I think last week. There's a lot of like code available for you to like build MCP servers. OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and Microsoft have sort of like have their own labs and stuff for building MCP servers. And there is also like an agentic AI foundation and Linux foundation that are sort of helping to build the protocol and everything together. So there is like a huge ecosystem behind it. The idea is that if we are going to be using AI agents for talking to external applications, this standard is going to play a big role. Now, before I go into a live sort of a code level demo, again, basic thing, the way it works is a person talks to a host, which is your AI agent, or it might be Claude Cowork, it might be ChatGPT. Then it uses a transport to talk to the MCP server that gives it the tools, the resources, and the prompts. Okay, now I do want to show you guys a bit of a live demo of how a server is set up, how it's actually configured. Now, before I do that, I am going to pause. Any questions, folks, till this point? I know we talked a lot of theory till now, looked at the architecture and everything, but I just want to make sure that that people understand, and I just want to give it like a few minutes. Is MCP server a file? So I'm going to show that. But MCP server is a code file. It's a program that you run. MCP server calls actual application servers the business. Yes, MCP server does call the actual application server. That is the whole logic here. That let's say all your business logic, let's say who was the person? Jay, you run Jira, you own Jira. Your application logic is in Jira APIs. The MCP server is sort of a wrapper around it so that an AI agent can have access to your application logic. Best way to store tokens in local so it will not go through model, etc. That's a great question, Deepak. So I'm gonna answer it in two parts. The best test way for you to do this is through OAuth, because in that situation you don't have to store tokens locally. It is something that is managed at the transport level of those two systems. I think if you are running something locally via standard IO, you don't necessarily need tokens. But the best way is to have like a proper OAuth or some sort of an authorization layer that takes care of the token behavior so that you don't have to sort of store it. Andre, I tried to use MCP for UI front design, but my local LM listener picked wrong commands or closest command on my UI. How can I fix this? Andrea, a couple of ways. Again, it's important to remember that we are spending time in a non-deterministic model. The AI models are non-deterministic. So if your AI model did not fully understand an MCP server, I would create a workflow and give it rules that, okay, these are the tools that you use in this situation. And to sort of define every session that you start with your model, to sort of start with those predefined set of rules, because again the model itself is non-deterministic. So oftentimes my solution is, if you run into problems that the model is not getting it right, just create like a simple file and write down those rules that, okay, these are the things to do, never do all of this, and every time when you are doing a session, load those skills into your window so that the model knows that, okay, has extra guard to sort of decide which MCP server, like what tools it has to use. The reason why I say that is, if you are using an external MCP server, you don't control how they have written the tools, right? You can't, there might be something wrong in the way that they wrote the tools, but you don't really control that. So that's additional information that you might have to provide. Why we need right hand to visit just a collection of APIs? I'm going to answer a few questions. Okay, where are we? Nope. That I answered. Sorry, folks. I have to go a little up. Okay. Do MCPU, what is the best way to save tokens? We talked about, please include in demo how to create tools. Yes, we will talk about it. Okay, sorry. I'm just getting a little confused in because there are so many. One second, folks. I might have to bring back the chat. Okay. One of the questions is how to handle situation. Okay, that is already answered. Okay. UI UX answer. Why we need Python to write MCP server? Is it not just a collection of different APIs? The reason you need an MCP server itself for Python is it might not just be a collection of APIs, right? It might be that you have a series of APIs that needs to be called together. You might have a workflow. You might have, like I said, resources. You might have skills. So it's not just an API, it's all the business logic of your application all incorporated into that server. And that's why you do need to write a program, an actual programming server that's communicating to your application and getting all that context. Is it a proxy or pass through rather than a server? Can I assume it for my understanding? It is not a proxy or pass through. It does a bunch of things. Think of it this way. When you go to your model and say, tell me the weather in Wisconsin, what's happening behind the scenes, and I'll show you guys in a second. That information, I want to know the weather of Wisconsin, is sent to the MCP server. Then the MCP server needs to do its own messaging at a code level to convert that data into something that your application, your backend weather API will understand. So it's not just a pass through, because the way the human might be talking in the AI agent is very different from how your AI APIs might work in the background. And so it has to do all that translation and transformation between the request of a user to the API parameters, and all of that logic goes through it. Sometimes it might be a pass through, but in most cases, it is not. How to create tools and how to use them. Yes, Deepak, we are going to talk about that. The question was, please include in demo how to create tools and how to use them. We are going to do that. Okay, I'm going to wait for 5 more minutes, folks, if people, or maybe, sorry, 30 more seconds if people have more questions before I go into a demo of how would you sort of write a tool like that. Is there a special MCP skill builders? Skill builder. I wouldn't say that you can. There might be a skill that someone has wrote to build an MCP. So there might be somewhere. Maybe I actually don't know. Building an MCP skill GitHub. Let's see if somebody has. Oh yeah, there is. I was wrong. So there is like an entire skill that people can use on their Claude. I didn't know it existed. Thanks for that question, Izzy. I put it on Zoom chat. But you can probably use this in your Cloud Code for creating an MCP server. Okay, cool. There are no more questions. I'm going to do a quick live demo, folks. Again, I will say demos tend to sort of break at sometimes. So even if they do, I'm hoping that conceptually you get. Now, for building an MCP server, right? Like I said, you do need to be able to sort of create sort of create a software server, a program, a running server that's talking to your backend application and sort of exposing those tools. So there are a lot of different available software development toolkits that are there. There is one in TypeScript, there is one in Python. I am going to be using the Python one today because that's the one that I really like. You can use whatever your flavor is. When they say type 1, type 2, type tier 3, I think it's more so around like these are the ones that are most used, and this is slowly getting used, and these aren't that much used. So it's still early days of this entire thing. You can see more of the tiering here, but you do have a lot of stuff here. I will copy paste this link and then so that you can see. I got a question. So MCP are built in CC in Cloud Code. No, you don't need Cloud Code for writing in MCP server. You just need to be able to write code. You can use Cloud Code. You can use Codex. As long as you can write code, that's all that you need. Okay, let's open my PyCharm. Am I on the right server? Yes. Okay. So I am going to sort of like show you folks slowly, and I'll increase the size and everything so that you can see, and then hopefully that will give you guys a little bit of a sense. Hold on. 1 second, folks. Okay, now it's bigger. Hopefully you can see this. This is closed. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up from a few folks that they can see my code screen, at least cleanly? Okay, awesome. Okay, cool. Awesome. Now, oh, great. There was a thumb party. Okay, so the way it sort of works is, let's go back here. Let me sort of show you guys what I'm using. So in this system, I'm using like, you know how when you are writing a typical Python project, you do use a sort of like a package manager. So I decided to use UV as the package manager because that's like a lot easier to get going. It sort of helps quite a bit. But if I open my pyproject.toml file, which contains the packages that I need, I basically these need two. I need an HTTP package that I used, and then this is the main thing that I needed, which is the MCP package. This is the package that I was showing you here. No, wait, I have to sort of do one thing, 1 second. This is the package that I was sort of showing you guys here. So I am using this Python SDK package, so sort of actually building the MCP server. So you do need that for it to be able to do that. Okay. Let's go back here. Now, my entire MCP server, folks, and I hope that I can like sort of show this. The MCP injector is super useful. Yes, Romil, I do want to talk about that too, but I'll sort of show that in a second. So my entire MCP server essentially is this file. So first of all, it's a Python file, it's a programming file, but the entire MCP server is written in this file. Now, it has a bunch of imports like the fast MCP, that is the server that actually creates the actual MCP server. So I have the MCP fast MCP as something that is imported from that SDK. Now, like I said, I am sort of the MCP server is talking to the US's weather API. And so you can see there is a link to that API as that's a normal setup, how you would do it in a program. And then it's just the user agent just so that like we can record in the HTTP requests. A fast MCP is the Python's SDK, Python's development toolkit, Arpan, for building an MCP server. So the way it sort of starts is you start here. You sort of create an instance of fast MCP, you give it a name. The name is the name of your MCP server. Now I'm going to close a bunch of this so that I can sort of show you guys a few things. And that way is you can sort of get a sense. 1 second. Okay. Now, remember I talked about that there are three different kinds of things that an MCP server exposes. So we are going to go through one of them. One by one. The first thing that an MCP server exposes is this thing known as an MCP tool. Now, remember, a tool is an actual action that you want your MCP server to do. So now for defining tools, it's very straightforward. You sort of just use this annotations in Python. Again, if people don't know what that is, you might need to do a refresher if you are doing Python. But basically, these two functions are two different tools. First function is get alerts. Now, what this function does, it get if there are any alerts for a particular state in the US, and then this gets a forecast. It gives a weather forecast. Now, when I open this, right, now this is the part where it's very, very important. When I have defined a tool and when I have defined this, um, this comment, this Python comment, this is the documentation of a function is very important because this tells the AI host, the AI agent, what the tool is about. So this tells the AI host that, okay, if you are using this tool, call this tool if you want to get the weather alerts for a particular state. And as an argument, it just takes a US state code, CANY or something. So this is super important. Sometimes when your AI agent is not able to use the right tools, it's mostly because it has like sometimes the description can play a role. If the description is something vague, it will never be able to figure out in discovery what is the purpose of this tool. So it uses the name of the function, the name of the tool, and also this as a way for it to know that what is the actual purpose of the tool. Now, inside the tool, as you see, it's not just a simple pass-through stuff. It is doing a bunch of things. It is creating the right URL. It is then calling that URL. I just abstracted it into a separate function, but if I go back into this, it's just an HTTP function call to the weather API. It's sort of waiting for a response there. So if I go back here, it gets the request. If there is no data, if there is some issue, it sort of also gives an error. So error handling is also very important, right? Because you want your AI agent to actually give good errors. You don't just want it to give like status 201, sorry, status 400 or 404. So it is going, so your errors that you define here are very useful. And then again, if there is something missing, so says, oh, there is no active alerts. Otherwise, it just sort of it sort of gives all of this response back to the user. Now, let's go back up. Now, this is one of the tools. Folks, I'll start answering your questions in 2 minutes. So you have one of this. The other one is this. This is getting weather forecast for a location. Now, in this case, again, the comment is telling is important. So it needs the latitude, it needs the longitude, and then it takes the points, it converts it into a request to the backend, gets the data back, and then sends the data back in a formatted. So you see here, I'm actually creating like a good format that I want the AI agent to show back. So there's a lot of massaging that I have to do here. I have to make sure that I'm getting the right latitude and longitude. If there are errors that are coming from the backend, then I have to also send it back to the AI agent. So both of these tools are sort of wrappers around different API endpoints. The first one is using the alerts endpoint, and the second one is using the points endpoint. I'm going to quickly answer the questions because that's important, I think, for this. Does the LLM convert the state name into two-character code? Yes. So that is the stuff that your LLM is doing. And sometimes it can do that incorrectly as well. Where if you say, tell me the weather in New York City, it might accidentally send in the wrong code, which then might cause an error. Most of the LLMs, especially the commercial grade ones, are able to figure that out, but it can happen. Uh, Why do we need to build MCPs agents themselves if pulling up MCPs through Git or online? Do I even need to worry about building MCP scratch? Wanted to know if this is true. Great question, Nikhil. A few different ways to look at it. You might need to build an MCP server for the company that you are working for. So let's say you are working for a company that has a bunch of APIs. So you might have to build it for them. At a personal level, I find MCP useful if you have a set of skills that you want to use locally on your system and you have multiple clients. So, for example, in my use case, I use Cloud Code, I use Codex, I also use the open source model router and all of that stuff. All of them, I want to sometimes give them access to the same set of skills, not tools necessarily. And so I have an MCP server configured for all three. So it really depends as in like how do you want to do it, but oftentimes this is more useful if you have something that you want to expose to the world for either commercial or open source purposes. Is the string on a line by itself part of this or something you have decided to include? I'm assuming you are talking about all of this. Oh yeah, this is just something I decided to include. It's not a part of the spec. I would even say, Salim, I am lying. I didn't decide to include this. I wrote this using Claude Code. So Claude Code decided to do it. I'm pretty sure it's not a part of the spec. Does it include the state name? Now I understand the complete life cycle. Thanks. No, that's all good. So again, there are, so we created these two different tools. We created hold on, this tool, which is the get alerts tool. And then we also created the get forecast tool. Simple, makes sense. This sort of allows you to sort of get these two tools. Now, I also want to show the other stuff. Now, let's say you also want to expose prompts. And then you want to tell prompts because you want your users to actually execute specific workflows. So in that case, you can also do mcp.prompt. You can give it a title. So each of your prompt can have a title. So this is a prompt for severe weather briefing. This is a prompt for trip packing advice. And now if I open this, it just has a prompt. Now, this is a very dumb prompt, right? Like this is just your English written out. You can do it yourself as well. But sometimes it also sort of like helps to have a larger skill here, like a much more complicated prompt can be put in so that the user of the AI agent doesn't have to figure it out by themselves. So you have this as a prompt. If you go here, you have another prompt. So now these two prompts are also available for my AI agent. I'm going to show you guys all of this in a second of how this actually works. So I have the weather briefing prompt. I have the trip packing prompt. So we looked at tools, we have prompts. I did want to cover resources. So there are two resources that were added that I added. One resource just gives me a hard coded list of states. So it just tells me like all the states that are supported by this MCP server and it gives like the 2 letter code. This might be useful if your LLM is getting confused. So it can use this resource. And then there's another resource which is sort of like which sort of give alerts for a particular state. This is again like a dumb resource. You don't really need to use it this way. That the tool is fine, but I just wanted to sort of make sure I'm covering it. But the idea of resources again is to give some static important information or some information as just like a text file to your AI agent. Uh, can you mention again what the prompt tools are for? Uh, Prompts, I will show you what that means, but basically what it does is rather than the user having to write the prompt by themselves, it gives a good template. The idea is you give like the prompt that works best with your MCP as a part of your prompt exposure here. And then rather than the user having to write, oh, I am going to write my own prompts, what ends up happening is that the user ends up like actually like just calling this prompt and then they don't need to even read what all it has. It can be a very big prompt, but it's an optimization that you are providing from your MCP server after doing testing and realizing that if the users are using these particular prompts, then that gives the best output from the MCP server. So it's sort of a way for the user to not figure it out by themselves and giving them advice on maybe prompt it this way, you might get a better response. Let me know, Arpan, if I answered your question. Okay, amazing. Now, let's go back. Now, once I have built this, right, I have this MCP server all set up. Now, I am using the the standard IO. I'm not putting it on an HTTP endpoint yet. But when you have created a local MCP server like this, and you want your AI agent to connect to your local MCP server, this is where you need to do a bunch of configuration. I'm going to show you guys. So let's say I wanted my Claude, right? As you can see, this is my Claude to actually be able to connect to an MCP server. Now, the way I would do that is, let me go back here. I would go into my Claude account. There are a few ways of doing it. Let's go to settings, inside settings, inside developer. So you have to configure your MCP server inside your AI agent. Now, there are for most of the AI agents, what that means is that you have to write the configuration in your AI agent's config file. Typically, those config files are JSON files. So now if I click on edit config, you see this is the JSON file that is there for Cloud Code. I'm going to show you how this actually looks like. Everybody is going to have a different location of that. Not this one. This is Visual Studio Code. Okay, let's go back there. Edit config. Let's do open with Visual Studio Code. Okay. So now every AI tool, every AI agent has some or the other mechanism of sort of, let's just close this, of sort of setting up a configuration for your AI agent. So you can see like this is a bunch of configuration I have for my AI agent. The only thing that matters for an MCP server is this part. So what you essentially end up doing is you tell your AI agent that, okay, I'm adding an MCP server known as the weather server. Now, this is the MCP servers tool. Now, one of the things that ends up happening is then you give it the command. So every time your AI agent is running, it is its responsibility, if it's a local MCP server running as a process, to actually run the server. So you tell it the command. So in this case, I'm using UV. I could have totally used Python directly. You give it the directory where your MCP server is, and you tell it what it has supposed to run. Now, every time your AI agent boots up, it is going to run this command to actually run an instant or a process of your MCP server. Now, if that is successfully able to happen, I'm showing you in Claude, it's going to look different in every tool. If you go to Claude, let's start a new session. New session. Okay. Let's close this off. You click on this plus, you go to connectors, and you can see there is the weather connector here. So the weather connector is already there. That is the MCP server that I added. You can see I have other as well, which I use. So I use Google Drive. So all of these are MCP servers. I think Google Drive's MCP server I installed a few weeks back. But this is pre-configured in Cloud. You don't need to manually configure it. But for something that you are configuring it to, you sort of add it to the configuration file and then it starts showing up here. Now, the way to see whether it is working or not is to try and invoke the tools, and we are going to do it one by one. So let's say I want to know the weather in, tell me weather in New York. Okay. So when I do this, let's see what happens. It's thinking, it's saying, oh, it found a tool, it found the get forecast tool. So if you go here, you can see that it found the get forecast tool. This was the tool that I had exposed here, this one. So now, because of the discovery, it knew the tool and it knew what it actually does. And so now it sort of figured that out. Let's say I write, tell me weather alerts in New York. Let's see what happens. Now, and again, it has loaded tools. It found a tool. It's all go, get alerts, and it will tell you, okay, get alerts. This is the data, the request that goes in, and this is the response that you sort of get. And then you can see all of this. There is a flood watch, and all of this is live, folks. This is happening right now. And it is doing it using the get alerts tool. So again, now your MCP server is now able to connect to, like, your AI tool is connected to those MCP servers and it's using that. Does it prioritize existing connectors tools as opposed to looking up the weather online? Yes and no. I feel like Claude and more or less chat gpt and these things do, but sometimes I've also found that they do make a mistake and you have to tell them that, like, no, use this tool. That is where I'm a huge fan of, like, whenever you are starting a new session, give it the context of your tools as an additional thing so that it doesn't mistake. But I do think a lot of these tools are right now defaulting to, like, only using the tools that you have configured first before going into a general one. Does it fact check the answer it receives from the on-premise MCP server? Great question, Pedram. I don't, it does not right now because I didn't tell it to, but you can tell it to fact check it. One thing to keep in mind is there is an inherent sort of a thought process of, if you are using an MCP server, some of that fact checking should be happening at the MCP server level as well. Like, the MCP server should try and to be as deterministic as possible, because the MCP server itself, right? It's not calling an AI endpoint. It is calling the actual API endpoint. It's actually getting the live data. So it's not using an LLM model. Some MCP servers can also do that, but most don't. So the inherent trust also lies in the fact that the MCP server is calling the right API endpoints to get the right data, because it's, so you try and make it as deterministic as possible. But if you do want your LLM to double check, sure, that's something that you can add. You can also expose that as a prompt. I'll show how prompts work. That as a prompt, that the person in the front end and the AI agent can use, that already has fact check as a part of it. Does it fact check the, okay? How does the LLM agent decide which MCP server to look? Again, it doesn't decide necessarily the MCP server. I think it decides more so internally on the tools that the MCP server has. And for each of the tools, right, like I showed you, the name of the tool, the description of the tool, those are parameters that it receives in its discovery phase. And then it makes a decision based on, like, which of these makes the most sense in terms of, like, the action that it is doing. So it happens during discovery, and it uses the name of the tool, the name of the server, even maybe, or, and more specifically, these descriptions as a guide to when to use a tool, when to not use a tool. Let me know if I answered both of your questions. Let's go back here. When you asked about New York, call the tool that needed latitude and longitude. So it is the LLM that figures out the lat long. Uh, and then calls the MCP server tool function with the right parameters. Yes, Salim, it is the LLM. It is the model who figures out the latitude and longitude and then sends it to that. Now, if you want to make sure that it's picking up the right latitude and longitude, there are MCP servers that are just built for getting latitude and longitude. So it can maybe call that tool first, get the right latitude and longitude, and then call the second tool. But yes, that is the conversion that is done by the LLM. It's not something that you had to do. And which is why this is very interesting because the LLM does the translation. It converts your normal English into the API endpoints requirements. Does agent registry has any role to play here? Um, I guess I don't know. Maybe if you can elaborate a little bit more, Rashpal, what you mean? Can you? Okay. Anything we can write in the MCP server or tools to help the LLMs to better determine when they should be using our tools? Can use triggers in skill files. Yeah. Arpan and Nikhil. So a few things you can do. You can write it here. You can write it in the description of your tools. That is the most important thing in my opinion. To make sure that you are doing it. Then your next level can be the prompts that you expose, and inside those prompts, you can write like, oh, if you are doing this, these are the tools that you have to use. So there is a lot of stuff here that you can do to optimize that. How about duplicate item? Now tell me about Apple, and Apple could be fruit or company. That's a great question. I think it depends on, again, we are now talking to an MCP server that's for weather. So I don't know if it will actually trigger that, but this is a good question. It can depend on the LLM, how it responds, and it can depend on what the conversation, what is the purpose of the session that you have from discovery point of view. So agentic registry, Rashpal, is more for discovering AI agents. You will probably need an MCP registry to see what all MCP servers are there. I'm sure there is an MCP registry. Let's see. Now that we are here, yeah, there is an official MCP registry which has all the MCP servers that are created. So if people are curious, they can take a look. I'll leave it on the Zoom chat. For MCP, how do we know which API to call from which tools? So Deepak, that is the actual programming work, right? You have to figure that is the business logic part where you have to involve a a product owner, a program manager. You need to read through the APIs. So you have to sort of do your typical business design, system design work to actually figure out what tools should call which APIs. What if you have multiple MC weather functionalities? Can you specify which one to use? How would it choose which one to use otherwise? That's a great question, Pedram. If you have multiple MCP servers, you might have to prompt it. So let's say you have two different weather MCP servers. One of them might have tools for A thing, another one might have tools for B thing. If they are all different sets, there is nothing common in them, then it will be able to most probably figure out which one to use. But if there is some commonality, then you might have to provide some guidance into that. Got MCP and where do they live? Easy. We are learning about MCP easy because if in the future or even now, if you want your AI agent to talk to external systems, let's say you want your AI agent to talk to Jira, talk to Asana, talk to Netflix for that matter. MCP servers are becoming the common interface for you to be able to interact with all those external systems. So when return to so it uses to time. Venkat. Does LLM use my MCP server returned result to learn so it uses to train itself? It depends on your settings of how you are, which tool you are using. It's a separate topic, but privacy wise, you should always take a look at your settings. If it is allowed to train, then it will train. Okay, awesome. Now, does AI LLM model uses cached while calling MCP server tool? There is some usage of cache. I'm not super familiar with it, but I think it does have some mechanisms there. But again, that's a implementation detail. Yeah, the same question that you are also asking, Amy. I'm sure there is a way. I'm not fully aware because I've never built it, but I'm sure there is some way of caching MCP API calls or general API calls. Okay. I do want to quickly show you guys the resources and the other things as well. So now we looked at the tool calling, but when you have resources and prompts, they show up here. So the way it sort of works is you will get a tab like this, add from the tool, and then let's say you want to inject a prompt from the MCP server. So you will see them here. So let's say I click on this. It's going to ask me for which state you are looking for it. Let's say New York. I say add prompt. And now if you will open this, you will see that it got the prompt from the MCP server, injected New York into it so that like it's a prompt that's relevant for you. And then this prompt is a little better because it's very opinionated about what tool it has to use. So prompts are a way for you to actually optimize your usage of an MCP server, because then you don't have to write something. You just call the prompt. The prompt might be small, the prompt might be big, and then it can, like, you don't ever have to worry about it. And when you run this, now this is already going to actually get the alerts for New York. Again, prompts are, this is a very dumb example, but prompts can be super useful if your users don't know how the backend API actually and all of that stuff works. And they can just keep calling the right prompts, and the prompts can then abstract away all of that information. Now, I talked about prompts. Okay, sure, Arpan. We click on the plus. Again, this is for Claude. It's going to be different for everybody. Go to connectors, add weather, and then here you can see both the. So you will, in Claude, it looks like this, like a prompt here. And then these are the resources, right? Like I said, those are sort of the static resources. So now if I click on list states, it will just give me all the states as a static list. So these are like sort of your static resources that if you need. I think the most use case of a resource is like a prompt. So you use a prompt as a resource, add it, and then the prompt, you have an entire workflow in your AI already. You don't actually have to sort of write all of that prompt. Now, again, I have showed a very, very dumb example, folks, but there is a lot more there is a lot more there on the website that we already have. But just to sort of do like a quick recap before we sort of go to the end of the session, I'm going to go back here. This is the key part to keep in mind of how it actually works. You have a person or a host talking to like an AI client. The AI client is using either standard I or HTTP to talk to an MCP server, which exposes the tools, the resources, and the prompts. Now, one thing I will mention, I know a lot of folks had questions about whether it's a pass through or whether it's how do you build it. What I want you guys to sort of take away from this is an MCP server is just like any other server. And so you need to have the same software engineering principles. The tools need to be useful for the user. In this case, the user is an AI agent. The tools need to make sure they have the right authentication. They should be able to call the right API endpoints. So it's no different from your typical software engineering work. The biggest part is this is majorly for AI agents consumption. Typically, when you are writing APIs or tools, you are writing it for a UI or like another like a deterministic program. So the big software engineering principle that changes is that this is for a model to use rather than a human or a web or a front end to essentially use. And to also give like a quick broad summary of how the communication happens, your AI agent will initialize, connect to an MCP server, discover the tools, the prompts, the resources, and then it invokes them based on how the conversation is happening. Now, I know we are a little over time, but I do want to pause and near the end of the session, folks. Any questions? Could you show one more time where the MCPs connect to Claude? Great question, Anna. And thanks, Jay, for the feedback. Okay, so I'll show you for Claude, Anna, but it might vary for what tool you are using. For Claude, you do it in this file, Claude desktop config. So for me, it's here. Library application support Claude desktop config.json. And inside here, you have the MCP server. So this is, I know it's a little too zoomed in. This is just a simple JSON file, and you just add an MCP server key, and you keep adding the MCP servers here. Let me know, Anna, if I answered your question. And once you have added an MCP server and you have connected to it, you do need to restart your client so that it can like create that connection. What are different MCP servers can be written? Are you asking which programming languages, or are you asking what are the different kinds of MCP servers? Can you vibe code an MCP? I vibe coded this MCP, so totally you can vibe code an MCP. Code folder. Yes, I will be putting the code folder in the GitHub so you can see. Can you host the MCP and access it via HTTP? Yes. Remember in the slides I was showing you guys, hold on, where did it go? I was showing you guys that there are two different protocols. So we have, where is it? Standard IO and HTTP. So yes, for you have, it's a slightly different for HTTP, but not too different. But once you have made an HTTP MCP server, put it on a free server and then people can just use it. So the server is locally right now. Is that right? Yes, Anna. Thank you. So the server runs locally. Yes, yes. The server is running locally right now, Anna. Applications of MCP servers. I'm using LL Studio. It has MCP server. How can I use it? So again, the applications of MCP server are, let's say you want to connect your local AI to an external system. So you can connect it to your Trello, you can connect it to your Twitter, you can connect it to your Facebook. How to do that on LM Studio? It's hard for me to cover that right now. It's been a while since I've done it, but I'm sure you can find a YouTube tutorial on it. Are the servers always running, or they only run when they are called? So the servers start should if it's an HTTP server, it should always be running. But if it's a local server, it starts running when when a AI agent client tries to connect with it. But an HTTP server, it should always be up. How can we get the GitHub link? I'll mention it before people drop. All our information is going to be on our meetup channel. So the GitHub link will be here. The recording and the slides will also, and the resources will also be here as a comment. So you can get it here. I'll share the link to Git meetup on the chat. How would you configure MCP server in an enterprise setting where multiple users have to access it? Maybe you can use connecting to Jira as an example. Great question, Isha. So if you are configuring an MCP server in an enterprise setting, right? The first thing is you will need to use OAuth. You need to have an authentication mechanism for the different users that you have. So let's say for if I want to connect to Atlassian, which is Jira, Atlassian has an MCP. It has an Atlassian MCP server, which it also provides. And then what you would have to do is you would connect to this server. You can click on get connected and you will find a series of steps. So you can connect into this server and it does use an OAuth mechanism for it. So it really depends on your use case, but if in an enterprise setting you are doing it, you want the MCP server to have an authentication and authorization mechanism, and it should look like how your other OAuth apps look like, right? You click a button, it opens the terminal, it asks for right access, and if you do have the access only, then you can get the MCP server. We can have chain of MCP servers, right? We can have chain of MCP servers. It can call lots of MCP servers in parallel as well. So MCP servers are meant to be called by AI models. So you can totally have an AI model calling an MCP server, which uses an AI model, which calls another MCP server. But I would consider that a very wonky architecture, but maybe there is a reason for it. For remote MCP server, host would not need Python installed locally. Yes, for remote MCP server, you won't need Python at all. It uses the HTTP protocol. So it's like opening a website in a browser. Which are more costly, API or MCP? I actually don't know. That's a great question, Izzy. The thing is, the MCP costs are sometimes, so there are two kinds of costs. There is the cost of using an MCP server. So the provider of the MCP server will have their costs, but then you are also incurring costs on your tokens. So it really depends on who the provider is and how you use it. And if your token is heavy, the provider might be cheap, but your token cost might be a lot. So it really depends on like the combination. It's hard to sort of give like a baseline for it. Okay, I'm gonna give it a couple of more minutes, folks. Okay, I think people are dropping, so I'll just mention a couple of things. For our future sessions, folks, please come to our meetup. We are going to have a lot of information there and future sessions. Also, if you can follow us on LinkedIn, folks, we are there on LinkedIn and a lot of our resources are available there. So you can go to LinkedIn, you will find our resources there on our company page, or you can come to our meetup channel as well, and you should be able to find the resources. Also, folks, this was an amazing session. I love doing this. Do leave us feedback on Meetup. That's how we get better. That's how we sort of like also learn if you're doing the right thing. But thank you so much, folks. This was an amazing session. Thanks for all the questions. We all learned a lot. Leave us a feedback and join us for our future sessions. And if you want to come, please do join us on Meetup or join us on our LinkedIn as well. I believe I have shared the link. Yes, both the links are there on Zoom chat. But thank you, folks. That is the end of our session today. Have a great rest of your weekend.